Hey everyone, this is going to be my Reading Rainbow project. My name's Elizabeth Skinner, and let's get into it. So to start off, the books that I took a look at was Fahrenheit 451, The Da Vinci Code, The Call of the Wild, 1984, and The Hunger Games. So the connection between all of these books that they have been either banned or contested, that could be in the US, in another country, and I'll discuss a little bit of that later on. And the reason I decided to go ahead and do books that were connected by book banning was because I was actually doing research for another project on the impact of book banning, and I came across a very large list of banned books, which I found super interesting, and I kind of went down the rabbit hole. And after a little bit, I just went from there and decided that I thought that this would be a really interesting connection. So to start off with Fahrenheit 451, it was written by Ray Bradbury, published in 1953. Brief synopsis is that in the distant future, books are outlawed. Guy Montag is a fireman whose job is to destroy books, and what happens when he starts to question this. So why is this book worthy of recommendation? I thought it was worthy of recommendation because it contains a lot of thought-provoking content. It goes into what the author of the time thought was a possibility for the future, and it was banned because of its vulgarity and drug use, but it does offer a really good commentary on the dangers of destroying information, then also some interesting commentary on drug use. This falls into the dystopian genre, and I know a lot of young adults and teens really like that genre. So even though it is older, it could be something that interests someone who has already read a lot of books in that genre or is interested in that. And it reminded me a lot of The Giver if we're talking about books that it's similar to. I know that they're quite different, but they both deal with an overarching theme of an oppressive government taking away like information. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And I chose this book because I know a lot of schools don't teach it anymore. I know some still do, but I remember my school did, my high school did, and I think it can really provoke critical thinking among students. I remember my class had really good discussions surrounding this book, and I think it does a good job covering the dangers of censorship and that it could be applicable to other classes beyond just your standard English classroom. And the book has a lot of material and could spark a lot of in-depth conversations, as I kind of discussed before. So if I was going to use this in a classroom, I would prefer to use it in a small group-led activity where students get to read it and then discuss the themes. I think there's just like a lot of information, and sometimes that can get lost in a larger class. So the second book I decided to look at was The Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown. That was published in 2003. A quick synopsis of this book is symbologist Dan Brown is hastily thrust into an investigation of the murder of the Louvre curator. Meanwhile, religious secrets that could alter history as we know it are at risk of being lost forever. So I felt that this book was worthy of recommendation because it is just overall very engaging and it's pretty easy to read. And it also dives into fact versus fiction as well as the idea of history being rewritten. This book was banned in other countries such as Lebanon when it came out because it does not view the Catholic Church in a or doesn't put them in a very favorable light. The Da Vinci Code is a mystery, thriller, conspiracy fiction book. I think readers who are interested in some historical things surrounding the church would find this interesting because it uses real information and then makes up solutions to popular questions. It's also a murder mystery and full of puzzles, so somebody who likes solving puzzles or ciphers would also be probably really interested in this. I can't think of any books exactly like this one or something that like really reminded me of it, but I know that there is another murder mystery book in this series that actually goes before this that's also pretty easy to read called Angels and Demons. And then also with that being said, I think this book acts well as a standalone because it's not imperative that you read the other book first to understand what's going on. And then it does cover fictional issues within the Catholic Church. I think that this book would do best on a shelf, to be honest. It's got some pretty controversial takes on religion that are partially rooted in fact, partially in fiction. I do think it offers an exciting alternative where it could be used in a unit looking at this from a feminist perspective and how different groups or religions view women. I think this might be controversial if added into a curriculum because of the religious content, but especially if, it might upset some people who are Catholic. But my parents are Catholic and they really enjoyed it and they also liked the movie. If I was to teach it, I would look at it from a feminist lens. I'm not really going to go into that just because it would spoil a lot of the book. But I would also have students try to discern what pieces of history in the book are fact versus fiction as well. I think that could also be a really interesting activity. So the third book I looked at was The Call of the Wild, written by Jack London and published in 1903. So it follows a dog, Buck. He's stolen from his home and thrust into the harsh Canadian wilderness, and he will need to put aside his upbringing if he is to survive. This book is worthy of recommendation in my opinion because it's just such an easy read. It's fast-paced, it has a good message. It can also be used to discuss different parts of history and go beyond just your standard English classroom. For example, this book was banned and burned by the Nazi regime during World War II, so analyzing why that could be is such an interesting idea to me. This adventure fiction book works really well to debate the idea of nature versus nurture, and in terms of content, there's a lot of action, so I do think that someone who doesn't want to read something that is quote-unquote slow or boring might find this very interesting. And I think you could relate this to another book called Into the Wild in a unit where you talk about nature versus nurture discussing survival. And listen, I know a lot of people dislike this book. I think we actually discussed in this class that a lot of people dislike this book, but that's kind of the reason I chose it. I think taught correctly, this is an easy read for students. They can get a lot out of it. I think it also could be added into a curriculum to really analyze why it may have been banned by the Nazis, as I kind of talked about a little bit. I took a Holocaust studies class in high school, and we did something similar where we looked at books that were banned, and then did a presentation on why they were banned by the Nazis. And I think it could be something very engaging and interesting for students, especially ones who are interested in history. So the fourth book that I looked at was a pretty popular one, 1984 by George Orwell. It was published in 1949. It follows Winston Smith as he questions the government and system of his society. Smith can't seem to escape the fact that Big Brother is always watching. So when coming up with my connecting books, I thought 1984 would be a good addition because it is a book that covers issues on censorship and that was censored and banned for violence and sexual content. So a book that covers censorship was then censored. Similar to Fahrenheit 451, I think this is a really interesting concept to discuss. Why is a book that talks about government censorship then consequently banned? If I was to teach this book, which I believe is also considered dystopian, I would look at it from a socioeconomic lens. I think readers who are interested in history would really like this book even though it's fiction. I've also heard really good things about it from college age demographic and the adult demographic. My dad actually read this book this semester for the first time and he said he found it interesting and it helped him visualize the totalitarian government, but he didn't really like the end. Personally, I would definitely want to teach this to a class because I think it gets quoted a lot out of context and I would want to promote critical thinking among my students. If I was going to use this in instruction, I would definitely want to focus on the class divide within the novel and how that makes itself apparent. I do think you could focus on this book in a unit about totalitarianism and then relate it to actual historical events or government. So the final book that I chose was The Hunger Games. It was written by Suzanne Collins, published in 2008, follows Katniss Everdeen. She lives in Panem, a place once known as North America, where each year districts must send one boy and one girl to compete to the death on live TV to appease the government. I think that this book is worthy of recommendation, partially because it is so popular, but also because it has a lot of really good underlying themes. It's almost critiquing its own drop in the media, and I believe teaching that could be potentially very interesting for a class. Furthermore, a lot of students have already read this book or found it interesting, so you would be teaching something students are already excited to read. A quick note was that The Hunger Games has been challenged or banned for violence and its graphic depiction of children killing each other. People were concerned that it would desensitize children to killing and violence. This is a dystopian young adult novel. I've never met someone who didn't enjoy this Hunger Games from any age demographic, so I think most ages can enjoy this book. I also think there's a lot of interesting symbolism in the book that could be examined in the classroom. And I think that this book would be good for a small unit that covers media manipulation and propaganda. I believe that this is something that would be good for an entire class to read, but also I would put the following books that follow it in the series on a bookshelf for students to read later if they wanted to. So to wrap everything up, looking back, I think I did a lot of dystopian novels and would probably change it up if I had to do a project again and try to expand my horizons a little bit. However, I think all of the books that I talked about could offer something interesting and important for students to learn. Furthermore, I think it would be interesting as a unit to look at these books and examine what they are about versus what they were banned for and how those kind of intersect with each other. Beyond classroom use, I honestly really enjoyed all of these books and would recommend them. My parents ended up reading a couple of them too, like 1984, The Da Vinci Code. My mom's read The Hunger Games, and they also enjoyed those, and my parents are pretty picky about books, so I think there is something to be said there. But yeah, overall, that's everything. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope everyone's semester ends up great.